discipline your mind.
Do you like books?
Yeah.
Have you actually read the book?
I found it compelling.
I've been getting asked a lot what books I enjoyed and influenced me the most in prison.
He's relentless, all right? He won't quit.
Or as I like to put it, ideas having sex.
Ladies, gentlemen, aliens alike, thank you for tuning in to my book review of The Rational Male by Rollo Tomassi. I actually did an interview with Rollo /chat where he divulged some of his wisdom, and I will link that in the description if anybody wants to check that out. 2 hours of free content. I was really excited to chat with him, as some of you who have been following me for a while may be able to tell from that interview. But as far as this book is concerned, I'm going to change my book reviews a little bit, insofar as I'm still going to say whether I recommend or discommend it, but I'm going to speak about recommendations specifically within the lens of who would I recommend this book to, because I think that's quite important. And the reason I say that is because depending on the time in my life, I will receive certain information differently, and it'll be more helpful to me or not, depending on where I am psychologically, mentally, emotionally, etc., where I am in my development. And because of that, I think people should kind of be at least somewhat cognizant of what questions they have about the way the world works with regards to the reading. And that's not to say I don't pick things up at random and read it, because I do. Not as often as I used to when I was young, when I was a youth. But I do think that there's something to be said for reading with a purpose and reading with a question, or at least some general questions in mind. Maybe, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a hard point objective, but why did I pick this book up? Well, I came across Rollo, actually, I think because I followed Naval Ravikant, who is another dude I really love to listen to. And I think he was retweeting someone who was retweeting Rollo. But one way or another, by hook or by crook, his tweets kept popping up on my timeline. And this was at least 3 years ago now. This was, I want to say third quarter of 2016. I could be wrong on that. It might be earlier. It might be a little later. I don't think it's later. I would say at latest it's third quarter 2016, maybe a little earlier, around there. And what he was tweeting was quite resonant with me at the time. I was interested. I was intrigued. He was talking about this red pill concept. He was talking about women in a way that at the time, and I think even now, was quite provocative, in the sense that, especially where I was in my life, I was on a really, really, really liberal campus in the University of Wisconsin, very PC, a lot of self-censorship going on, and just speaking for myself. And I do know for a fact that other people were self-censoring as well. As to how much and to what degree, I can't say. I can only really speak on my own experience. But it was, and I think even now, we're in a political climate where there are certain demographics that you can't really critique. You can't really talk about in any way that isn't positive. And I don't think that's constructive to a dialectical approach to debate, argument, or to coming to a greater understanding about the world. Because self-censorship, I think, is the most insidious and deleterious form of censorship, because the people who want you to censor don't have to actually do anything at all, because you're already censoring yourself for them. But again, just speaking of my own journey, this is about women, it's about men, it's about intersexual dynamics. And Rollo, he is I think it's a BA in psychology. He speaks about, in this book, the Rockstar 20s, as he calls them, or the time of period in a man's life where he's playing the field, sowing his wild oats, as the British might say. I don't know if they still say that or not, but he speaks on that as well. And he was in a rock band, I believe. I don't know if it was rock, so don't get mad at me on that one, Rollo, but some sort of music band in LA, and I think he was, a guitarist or whatever. So he was, he had the cool guy thing going for sure, the alpha thing going, as he mentions in this book. And so he does have experience with women, and I think what really attracted me to his writing was his voice. First off, I think is very hard-hitting, unapologetic writing voice. He has his way of viewing these topics, and he doesn't care if that offends you or if that makes you feel uncomfortable. And I think that's really attractive to me, when people are, unapologetically authentic, especially in the writing. And he's also quite a concise writer, I would say, a bit verbose at times, if I want to critique him. And that definitely annoyed me more back then than it did now. But I think the positive about that is I did learn a lot of new words from Rollo. Words like veracity, dovetail, Pollyanna. These are words I didn't know before, just off the dome, that I can think of that I learned from Rollo. So it is it's a critique, but it's a small one, because it's really about the ideas and how they change your consciousness. And when I read, I write on the pages too, which helps me think about the concepts more and learn them better. And writing something in your own words is actually one of the best ways to remember something new, some new information. But as far as what this book is about, again, it's about intersexual dynamics, especially in the framework of the modern era of the 2000s. And and he talks about this too, as chivalry being dead, romanticism being dead. And I've heard other guys too in the manosphere speak on this. And the manosphere is kind of the sphere that Rollo operates in on Twitter, and he's kind of one of the figureheads in the manosphere. There's 3 R's: Roosh, Royce, and Rollo. And I think Royce goes by Artiste now. And by far, Rollo is my favorite out of those 3. And again, I really liked how he came at it with very academic language, but at the same time, it was rooted in practical psychology and experience. And he also goes into evolutionary biology as well. Talks about hormones and stuff. That's more so in the 2nd and 3rd books. This is more so I would say like a eagle eye or hawk eye view of intersexual dynamics. Whereas some guys, and I've read these guys' books, like for example, Roosh, just what I've read from him is a lot more kind of boots on the ground, his experience with dating women, etc. And I can't remember the name of the book, but I found that particular book to be for me, again, at the time I read it, and it's really, again, this is why I'm framing my book reviews in this new way of where you are in your own development. And I can't remember the name of the book that I read from Roosh. It's pretty cheap. I bought it I read it on my Kindle, I think, my phone. And he was talking about just getting dates and how to set up a date, and you know, it is, for me, it was I was past that already in my development as far as you know, attracting women or learning how to spend time with women. But that's not to say it couldn't help you or, you know, some other guy, right? And I actually wish I would have read, you know, a book like that earlier on. I think it would have helped me move along quicker. But Rollo talks about one of his main concepts is hypergamy. Now, hypergamy, for those that don't know, is the act or process of dating or marrying sexual selection, upwards sexual selection, right? And this is what women naturally they do. They marry up, they trade up a lot of times, and they're attracted upwards, right? They're, you know, at the very least across, but usually up, whereas guys are generally across and down. And you see this too with, you know, there's one study in particular I'm thinking of, and I can find it and pin it in the comments and put it in the description box as well. But and Rollo talks about this too, of alpha and beta, and by definition, alpha is the minority, you know, at most 20%. And I think this study, I am remembering or misremembering, perhaps, I think it was 15%. And it says something like, on college campuses, like 15% of guys were having all the sex, pretty much. And I can tell you from personal experience, not me per se, because on the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus, I was not in the top 15% or even the top 20%. And I say that, you know, humbly and truthfully. And you know, I was friends with a couple of guys on the football team, and just the stories they told me from, and these guys weren't even stars. They were bench players. Like, they never saw action on the field, but they could get women, I'm not going to swear, so easily. Is a little mind-blowing to, I think, the average guy. And I think a lot of guys don't fully comprehend that, because I remember a conversation I had with a guy on my floor in the dorms my freshman year, and I think I was just complaining or expressing that anger. I was like, dude, I just know that there's dudes out there that are getting a lot of the action. Or I don't know if I said that, or I think I was just expressing maybe it was just my general sexual frustration. I can't remember exactly what I said, but this guy's response was, well, you know, girls want you to date them and stuff before they have sex. And I was just like, dude, you have no idea what's going on on this campus. You know, and again too, like, I think this is like something that universities try to sell to people to get them to attend is, you know, there's I'm schmacked party culture. When in reality, again, it's like 15% of guys are actually getting all of the tail. And Rollo talks about this too, but he explains hypergamy, and he explains the way women think in many different facets. And one thing that I learned from Rollo, which I think is perhaps the single most practical and perhaps important thing just for everyday life, is the concept of a shit test. And a shit test is basically a test of dominance in some way. Usually it's just psychological dominance, but sometimes it's physical dominance too. And this is hard for, I think, a lot of guys to understand, especially guys that come from a background of a childhood or a training of you should mean what you say what you mean, and take people at their word. And the reason I say that is because, and Rollo says this too, he says, men communicate overtly, women communicate covertly. And again, this is something that I struggled with, because I would try to take, women at their word, right? And I think this is kind of unfair way to treat women. But again, it's not completely one's fault if that's the way you were trained by people in your family. Because I think it kind of conditions you to see or treat women as defective men in a way. This ideals that, certain people in your family might have about the way women and men should be. But then there's reality, right? I mean, there's a reason it's called an ideal and not reality. And if you've never had anybody explain this to you, which I think most guys would fall in that category, it can be hard to learn, because I think another thing too is maybe women less so. I don't know. I'm not friends with women such that I would ask them such a thing, or again, that they would even tell me. I think women would know this better than I would, but I know for a fact that most, if not all, men like to think of themselves as good with women, even if that is not true, right? And coming to grips with the reality or the fact that one isn't good with women, one doesn't know how to talk to women, one doesn't know how to date women, is extremely difficult, because you have to overcome, and it was difficult for me, certainly back in college, because you have to overcome that ego override, right? Where your ego is kind of making up for the dissonance between your self-concept and reality, and what's actually going on in reality. And I remember actually the conversation I had with one of my best friends and roommates at the time. It might have been both roommates, actually. I can't recall exactly, but it was, I basically said, like, look, I don't have game. Like, I realize I don't have any game. This is, back in the day now. But, and that's not to say, I'm, Casanova or anything like that. But, coming to that realization, I think, was important, because it meant that I was humble enough to admit that I wasn't very good at talking to women. And it depends on your conditioning too, because if you come from a situation, maybe a small town, small school, maybe you moved schools a lot, and you were in a situation before where you didn't have to put in any effort in high school to get, attention from girls, or even more, right? And you go to a big university, that's, you're then a small fish in a big pond, right? As opposed to a big fish in a small pond. And that's a huge adjustment for a lot of people, and some people can't handle that. And that adjustment of not only your external surroundings, but your internal psychology as well, in insofar as adjusting your self-concept and your ego, is difficult. Because, just speaking for myself, I've been in situations where I've been near the top of the ladder, near the middle of the ladder, and pretty much at the bottom of the ladder too, right? So, and, now it's, I think, is quite, learning those lessons, I think, is very important. But at the time, it's not very fun, right? And he goes on to describe concepts such as plate theory, or and I kind of see plate theory as a antithesis to one-itis, and Rollo describes one-itis as well, which is basically, it's the third page. an unhealthy romantic obsession with a single person, usually accompanied by unreciprocated affection and completely unrealistic idealization of the said person. Chapter 1. The Soulmate Myth. There is no one. One-itis is a paralysis. You cease to mature, you cease to move, you cease to be you. And I think any man who says they haven't succumbed or been infected with one-itis at one point or another is lying. And some guys, unfortunately, never truly get out of this. They move from one-itis to one-itis, and it's painful when you go through that and you show someone who you are, especially over a longer period, be it weeks or months, and they reject you, or worse, they use you as a tool, right, or as an instrument for their ego. This is quite hurtful, and it definitely does a number on your self-concept and your ego. But I think that destruction of the ego is extremely helpful insofar as it propels you to improve yourself. He talks about buffers. Rejection is better than regret. And I write again on the pages sometimes, and I wrote, don't go to the grave with a loaded gun, which is something my friend Marcus told me once. He actually has a YouTube channel as well. And he talks about other buffers too, long-distance relationships, playing friends, online dating, idealization of gender, objectification of gender. He says this might be less obvious, but both sexes objectify one another. Naturally, when we think of this, the popularized notion is that men objectify women as sex objects, but women have a tendency to objectify men as success objects for the same reason. Older women, younger women, scarcity mentality, and he talks about the importance of having an abundance mindset, leagues or higher standards, pornography talks about as well, and how that's a buffer. The concept of alpha, and he talks about the alpha Buddha. This guy named Corey Worthington, who if people want to look him up, you can YouTube Corey Worthington. It's funny dude. It talks about the learned alpha, the natural alpha, the contextual alpha. And so he goes into the idea of alpha, and again, plate theory, where you are, you're not committing to any one woman right away. You're testing the water, so to speak, right? And seeing what kind of women are out there. Talks about white knights, the classic white knight archetyped. Dijo sin hablar, told without speaking. Women never in all caps, want full disclosure. Nothing is more self-satisfying for a woman than to think she's figured a man out based solely on her mythical feminine intuition, i.e. imagination. When you blurt out your feelings or overtly make known your optionless status, regardless of the context of the nobility of your intent, all you do is deny her this satisfaction. And again, this is something I had to learn too. It's like when you explain something in the context of dating, and I think this is kind of why romance is dead, or one of the dark ages of romance, as some guy said on Twitter. I can't remember who. because we're in such a PC world, which I think definitely affects it. There's the Me Too movement obviously going on. It's mostly happened already, but it's still going on, I would say, for sure, especially with the Epstein stuff that's going on. But I think relations between the sexes are quite I don't know if tense is the right word, but maybe tense, awkward, somewhat volatile, transactional, quite transactional. And again, in my eyes too, because women no longer really need men for anything, it's revealed, I wouldn't say regressed, I would say revealed our natural sexual tendencies, and for women's sexual tendencies to select the alpha male, those top 10, 15% of guys. And because of that, I think you have incels coming up. And that's not to say women are responsible for incels. I think it's up to and this is something too that Rollo talks about, it's up to the responsibility of each individual man to improve himself, right? But again, the culture at large has contributed, and I think created incels, because the reality is, there are guys out there who just can't get laid, and people don't like talking about this because it's quite uncomfortable, and people who kind of see things as what Rollo calls blank slate equal, 50-50 blank slate equal, are not really seeing reality, right? Because rappers, ballers, again, those athletes, top 10, 15% of guys in college campuses, they have essentially harems, loose harems, and there's many factors that go into this, right? The fact that women are more financially independent now. So like I said, they don't really need men for anything except, children if they want them. So in that sense, they are basically completely in control of the I guess that process, the courting process, maybe, is the best way to put it. And one of his key phrases, hypergamy doesn't care. Hypergamy doesn't care how great a father you are to your kids. Hypergamy doesn't care how you rearranged your college majors and career choice in life to better accommodate her. Hypergamy doesn't care if you, quote, never saw it coming. Hypergamy doesn't care if she was drunk, he was cute, and one thing led to another. Hypergamy doesn't care if you're bitter. And he has a bunch of these. And again, this is not to say that women are bad or this is evil or anything like that. It's about what's practical, right? Because we come from, evolutionarily speaking, situations, cultures, lifestyles, realities where men often died in war, women often died in childbirth, food was scarce, life was cheap, right? Up until, my grandfather's generation, if you were male, you were probably going to fight in a war. But fortunately, we're evolving, right? And we're to a point of abundance, especially in the West, where that's not quite as necessary. But that's how I believe hypergamy evolved, is for that practicality, right? Of quality over quantity. Because again, eggs are much more valuable than sperm. And I used this analogy before of a village of, say, 200 people, like the village of Lidice in Czechoslovakia during World War II was completely wiped out by the Nazis. But I mean, it was a pretty small village, like maybe 100 or 200 people. But say you have a village of 100 and 200 people, and almost everyone dies, but not everyone dies, right? And all that's left is one man and 10 women. Well, in 2 years, you've tripled your population, right? Whereas if you have one woman and 10 men, in 2 years, you've only added 2 more people to your population. And not to mention, most of those guys are probably dead from killing each other, right? And, you know, there's only one guy that can be the sire, right? So there's that numbers game too. Just the reality, really, of human reproduction in the sense of that numbers game, right? Population replacement. And this is what I kind of call the distilled wisdom of Rollo. And he's got the iron rules of Tomasi. These are kind of immutable rules that he has written about intersexual dynamics. Iron rule of Tomasi number 1. I'll just read the rules, and he explains them in depth. But frame is everything. Always be aware of the subconscious balance of whose frame in which you are operating. Always control the frame, but resist giving the impression that you are. Iron rule number 2. Never under pain of death, honestly or dishonestly reveal the number of women you've slept with, or explain any detail of your sexual experiences with them to a current lover. Iron rule number 3. Any woman who makes you wait for sex, or by her actions implies she is making you wait for sex, the sex is never worth the wait. Iron rule number 4. Never under any circumstance live with a woman you aren't married to or are not planning to marry within 6 months. Iron rule number 5. Never allow a woman to be in control of the birth. It's called birth control because someone is controlling the birth. There are presently 41 different types of contraception available for women. For men, there are only 2. Vasectomy or a condom. Your only line of defense against her choice, the only thing separating a man from a lifetime of interacting with the decider or altering the course of his life, is a thin layer of latex. And he goes on to talk about in the NBA in 2002, they issued a warning about flushing condoms down the toilet because women were fishing condoms out of the garbage and impregnating themselves with the sperm of these NBA players they were sleeping with. Iron rule number 6. Women are fundamentally incapable of loving a man in the way that a man expects to be loved by a woman. Men believe that love matters for the sake of it. Women love opportunistically. Oh yeah, here it is. He writes, everyone needs to realize that men are the romantics pretending to be realists, and women are the realists pretending to be romantics. And this is something that it's quite cheeky how he writes that, but I also think it's quite true. You know, women are quite emotional when they live in their emotions from moment to moment. In that sense, they are always being honest to themselves insofar as they are being honest to what they're feeling, right? And that's why I think trying to treat a woman as a man or as an effective man is quite sexist, and it's quite unfair to women at large. So, you can't necessarily trust women to say what they mean, but you can trust women to behave like women, to be true to their emotions. And that being said, when it comes to romance, I think women are far more practical than men are. And Rollo says that here as well, and he explains that. And, that's because of the huge investment that women have to make insofar as pregnancy is concerned, right? Iron rule of Tomasi number 7. It is always time and effort better spent developing relations with new, fresh, prospective women than it will ever be in attempting to reconstruct a failed relationship. And this is so hard to train out of yourself, right? Because you always, just speaking for myself, you think that you can, kind of win her back or maybe say something right. But I can tell you from my time in Europe, my experience of wandering through European cities, that this is 100% true. Iron rule number 7. Okay. Iron rule number 8. And I'm not explaining that any further. Always let a woman figure out why she won't sleep with you. Never do it for her. Again, this is, stuff like self-deprecation. He talks about this. Never seriously self-deprecate. You want to walk up to a woman and tell her that embarrassing thing that happened in high school or, whatever. And, even if it's just a joke, right? To you, it may be funny, but to her, it could be a complete warrant for dismissal, right? Never seriously self-deprecate with a woman you intend to be intimate with. So that's the next one, right? Iron rule number 9. Yeah, he talks about romantic comedies in this iron rule number 9 as well. The stereotype of the quirky but lovable guy who bumbles his way into a woman's heart may work for romantic comedies, but not in the real world. And he also, I don't know if it's this book, well, because I haven't read this recently, but I got, stuff written in here, multiple pages folded. But I did an interview / chat with a Brazilian jiu-jitsu master, Nick Gregoriades, last week. Highly recommend people check it out. It's awesome chat. Super zen dude. Hodge Gracie's first student and black belt. And he mentions this too about Disney. And I don't know, I think it's this book that he at least mentions Disney, but I think he mentions it in every book. Just the propaganda, really, that it is, and romantic comedies, like he just mentioned as well. And what Nick said was basically, I asked him, I think the question was, what is a belief that you used to have, but no longer do have? And he had 2 answers. I can't remember what the other one was, but one of them was he used to believe that there was such a thing as a perfect relationship. He now doesn't believe that. And I don't know if it was recent or years ago, but and he mentioned Disney during his answer. He's like, it's not like Disney. And that's it's quite unfortunate too, because we grow up watching Disney, watching romantic comedies, having women say that they want these things. And that's another thing Rollo mentions as well, in terms of how women communicate, is they rarely actually say what they actually want. That's their last line of defense, is overt communication. Once all other methods of covert communication are exhausted, Rollo writes, only then is overt communication used. And I like this too. He makes his own graph. It's like a sexual market value graph for men and women. And he basically maps out the lifetime. Looks like he uses 70 as the end. And it starts at 15. The lifetime sexual market value of men versus women. And he has men peaking at 38 on average, and women peaking at 22 or 23. 22 to 24 is what he says, which is another thing that you're just lied about too as well. And this is something that both men and women they use the age thing to try to control other people's selection of partners, right? Like, I remember I was working at a school as a tutor about a year and a half ago. One of my tutor co-workers was a female who was, I think she was 2 years younger than me. But, you know, and she found out I was dating an older woman, and it made her, you know, I could tell it bothered her. I was like, why do you freaking care, you know? And likewise too, like, older women denigrate men who date younger women, especially much younger women, right? And it's because they can't compete with them anymore. And that's, you know, some people I've heard described it as dark, but to me it makes perfect practical sense, you know? I mean, Rollo calls it the sexual marketplace. I coin it as the sexual battlefield or sexual battle royale. And, you know, it is a pretty harsh environment because, you know, there's the phrase, all's fair in love and war, right? You know, like, people betray friendships over this type of stuff. And I think that's how you really tell who your best friends are. And it's quite disappointing to me when, you know, I can tell when, you know, it hasn't happened recently, but when you're younger, you know, you can tell you're not really sure if one of your close friends would betray you, essentially, or sell you out over some pussy. And it's really only the guys who don't have any options or little options that do that would lose a friendship for a woman, just one night or whatever, you know. But it happens, you know, and likewise too with women. Women, you know, do that to each other too, and it's quite sad. But you know, that's the reality of the situation, right? Oh, look, the next page. Look at this, very next page, page 257. What does it say? Of Love and War, chapter 10. But yeah, just going back to I don't think I finished my thought on the sexual market value, I guess, ratings or assessment by Rollo. You know, like, you know, if a 35-year-old man marries a 22-year-old, say, a 20-year-old, 18-year-old, whatever, in today's world, he's going to get really harshly judged. Whereas in the olden days, quote unquote, this was quite normal. And that's not to say I'm advocating child brides or anything like that, or child marriage. But, you know, adults are adults, and I said this before, that I think they should take responsibility for their decisions, right? And again, men do this to other men too. Like, they'll say, you know, it's like older women and younger men, right? When it's an older man getting with a younger woman, it's like, oh, she could be your daughter, bro. Like, why don't you date your own daughter? And then the women say something, the older women say something similar. And the reason for that is because the older women know they can no longer compete with the younger women. And the younger men, likewise, know they can't compete with the older men, or not necessarily the older men, but those older men who are higher value than them, right? Because just because you're older and a guy doesn't mean you're necessarily have a higher SMV per se. And that's not to say that I'm, you know, assessing someone's moral or inherent ethical or unconditional value based on their attractiveness or sexual market value. I'm not saying that at all. But the fact of the matter is, we tend to initiate relationships at the most superficial level, right? And that's physical sexual attraction. I think there was, yeah. So I think I finished my thoughts on that as far as the age differences, right? He talks about the feminine imperative, the sisterhood über alles, which beatific, that's another great word I learned, blissfully happily, aberrant, departing from an accepted standard. So some more words I learned from Rollo. Talks about the sexual revolution, the impact of the birth control pill on society, and how much that has affected society. Talks about the feminine mystique, the wall, the Epiphany Phase, which I thought was quite enlightening to me. He speaks about the Epiphany Phase that women have around late 20s, early 30s, when they realize that they are running out of time to have children. This is more so true of women who have never had children before, right? And that's another thing too that made me realize is, I have people in my family who do this too, which is quite unfortunate, but they judge women for just being mothers. And I think society in the West, it doesn't value the role of the mother, I don't think, as much as it should, certainly as much as it used to. It seems like, society in the West, like trumps, like they put making money at the top of the importance priority list. And, I don't know if that's via propaganda, socialization, combination of both. Maybe they are the same thing. Sometimes I think they are, certainly. But, that's kind of the basis of society, right? That's what Kevin Annett talks about is the bond between mother and child. And he says that once you break that up, you can make people do whatever you want. You can control society once you break up that mother-child bond. So I think the West should really value the mother role more, because I think it's just sexist, and like women in my family do this. I'm thinking of one woman in particular, but it's not just, lots of women do this now too, especially I think a lot of young women are getting somewhat indoctrinated to not hold motherhood in high esteem. And I think it's sexist, and I think it's unfair to women, for women or men to do this to women who want to be mothers or just want to be mothers, because it's the most important job, I would say. Maybe not the hardest. Sometimes it is, but yeah. So that's what I'll ended on that as far as the bulk of the review. But who would I recommend this to? I would recommend this to any young man anywhere in the world at any time. Any guy who's just broken up with his girlfriend, any guy who's just gotten out of a divorce, any guy who's having trouble getting laid, any guy who just wants a girlfriend, maybe you just want to get married eventually. Even women, I think, should read this, who are interested in, anybody who's interested in sexual dynamics, intersexual dynamics, evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology, evolutionary sociology. He covers a lot of these things in this book. It's not just a one topic, one genre type of book. It is maybe encapsulated in the phrase of intersexual dynamics, but that spans many academic disciplines, and it helps, I think, men to understand women a lot better. So again, essential reading for any of those demographics that I said, especially young men, right? Anybody who's gotten out of a relationship recently. This is The Rational Male by Rollo Tomassi. Again, I will put the chat we did, 2-hour chat, 2 hours of free content for you guys, in the description box below. I will also put all of Rollo's links in the description box below as well. I have bought his other 2 books as well and read them, so I will review those once they get here. They are on their way from Europe, and as you may know, mail is quite slow due to this situation we're in. But yeah, check it out. And if you don't want to read it, or if you're not totally convinced, check out his blog. therationalmale.com. Check out his Twitter if your attention span is not even long enough for a blog post, or check out his YouTube, because a lot of guys, they don't read and they just like to listen to stuff while they work or whatever. He does shows weekly talking about this stuff, talking about the red pill, talking about intersexual dynamics. So just take a peek. This is The Lonely Ronin, the rational male in my own sphere. This has been a book review by Addy Ads, Atticus Skywalker Ads Reviews, Addy Reviews, skywalking on the pages of Rational Male. This is one of my favorite books that I've read in recent years. I've read it twice now. I've gifted it to a couple people now in my life. So I do like this book a lot. I hold it in high regard. What books do you guys like? Any books that you think I would like based on this review? Let me know in the comments. More book reviews coming in the future. If you guys want to check out my interviews or news commentary or other videos, please check on my channel. Feel free to give a like, and subscription is free to do so. Please subscribe if you are so inclined. Check out my brand new YouTube. I am a Rhodium account on there. Give that a subscription, because I do have content that has been banned on this channel, but it is on my BNT. And again, that link is also in the description box as well. If you wish to support this channel, I have a Patreon, a GoFundMe, Subscribestar, and another one. I always forget the other one. So if you want to make a one-time donation, or if you want to be a Patreon, you can select the amount that you donate, anywhere from $1 to as much as you want. So cheers. All the best from the Midwest. Stay frosty. Until next time.